Chapter 1. The Call of the North. When the icy winds swept across the fjords of Norway, carrying with them the scent of salt and pine, the people who lived along those rugged coasts knew the sea was both their enemy and their greatest ally. These were the Norsemen, later known to the world as the Vikings. Born between mountain and ocean, they learned from childhood that survival demanded strength, skill, and courage. Among them was Eirik, son of Thorvald, a farmer's boy who often stood on the cliffs watching the endless horizon. His heart stirred whenever he saw the longships cutting across the waves like dragons made of oak. He longed to join their journeys, to carve his name into the sagas sung by skalds in smoky halls. The land of the Northmen. The Viking homeland stretched across Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. It was a land of extremes. In summer, the sun refused to set, bathing the mountains in golden light. In winter, darkness swallowed the days, and snow buried the valleys. Life was harsh, and the soil was thin. Most men were farmers, tending small plots of barley, rye, and oats, while raising cattle, sheep, and goats. Women, strong and resourceful, managed the household, spun wool, wove cloth, and brewed mead. Yet despite their hard work, the land could not always provide enough. Famine was a constant threat. The sea, however, offered fish, trade, and opportunity. For the restless and the ambitious, it also offered something greater: the chance to raid, to plunder, and to seek fortunes in distant lands. The longship, gift of the sea. What made the Vikings truly dangerous was their ship. The longship was a marvel of design. Narrow, swift, and strong enough to sail across oceans, yet shallow enough to glide up rivers. Its prow was often carved with snarling beasts, dragons or wolves meant to terrify enemies and ward off evil spirits. With sails of wool-dyed blood-red and oars ready to cut through stormy seas, these vessels allowed the Norsemen to strike suddenly, vanish quickly, and travel farther than anyone thought possible. To own or command such a ship was the dream of every warrior. Beliefs and the gods. Religion shaped every Viking's life. They believed that Odin, the Allfather, ruled from his throne in Asgard, watching the world with one eye, while Thor, the Thunderer, defended mankind with his mighty hammer. Freya blessed love and fertility, while Loki, the trickster, sowed chaos and mischief. But above all was fate. The Norns, weavers of destiny, spun the threads of every man's life. Death in battle was not to be feared, for those who fell with sword in hand might be carried by the Valkyries to Valhalla, where endless feasts awaited. Eirik's first oath. One winter night, as snow howled outside, Eirik sat in the mead hall listening to the elders tell of raids in England, Francia, and the far-off lands of the east. His heart burned with envy. He swore to himself that when spring came, he would not remain behind tending sheep. He would take up the axe and shield. He would sail on the longships. He would hear the clash of steel and smell the smoke of burning towns. Above all, he would win glory, for a man dies, but his name may live forever. The drumbeat of destiny. By the time the ice broke on the fjord, rumors spread of a great chieftain gathering men for a raid across the sea. Warriors sharpened their axes, smiths hammered iron into new swords, and shipwrights caulked the seams of dragon-proud ships. Eirik knew his chance had come. The call of the North was no longer a whisper in his heart. It was the roar of the sea, demanding he step into the saga that awaited him. Chapter 2. The Voyage of the Dragon Ships. When the snows melted and the fjords thawed, the Norsemen prepared their ships for the sea. The entire village buzzed with activity. Men hauled timbers, women sewed great woolen sails, and children ran to the shore to watch the proud vessels take shape. Among them stood Eirik, his heart pounding with the knowledge that his life was about to change forever. The chieftain, Jarl Stenvar, had sent word that warriors were needed for a great voyage westward, across the sea, to the rich lands of England. Eirik, though young, swore his loyalty before the gathered men. With axe at his belt and shield on his back, he took his place among the crew of a longship whose prow was carved like a snarling wolf. The gathering of warriors. From nearby villages, warriors came. Seasoned fighters with scars across their faces, eager young men seeking glory, and even bondy farmers hoping to bring wealth back to their families. Each man carried his weapons: axes, spears, and round shields painted with bold colors and symbols. Hakon the bear, towering above all others, clasped Eirik on the shoulder and laughed. "Do not fear the sea, brother. It will test you, but if you prove yourself, it will make you strong." That night, the skalds sang songs of past raids, of gold taken from monasteries and kings who trembled at the sight of dragon ships. The hall filled with the smell of roasted meat and the sound of drinking horns clashing together. For Eirik, it felt like the heartbeat of destiny itself. The departure. At dawn, the ships slid into the water, their oars cutting the fjord like knives. Families lined the shore, waving and calling farewells. The women carried bundles of herbs for protection, while children shouted the names of their fathers and brothers. The sails unfurled, great squares of red and striped wool that caught the morning wind. Dozens of ships moved together, their prows rising and falling with the waves. To onlookers, it seemed as though a fleet of dragons had come alive, gliding toward the open sea. Eirik stood at the bow, the salt spray stinging his face. Ahead lay danger, fortune, and glory. Behind lay the simple life he would never return to. Life on the longship. The voyage was long and harsh. Each man took turns rowing, their muscles burning as the oars bit into the sea. When the wind rose, they let the sail carry them, but storms could strike without warning. Rain soaked them to the bone, and icy winds cut through their woolen cloaks. Food was simple: dried fish, flatbread, and ale stored in barrels. Sleep came in short bursts, lying on the deck beneath the stars, wrapped in cloaks. Yet despite the hardships, the men laughed, sang, and told stories. Their voices rose above the waves, carrying courage into the cold night. For Eirik, every star above seemed like a watchful eye of the gods, guiding their path. The wrath of the sea. One night, as the fleet crossed into open waters, the sky darkened. A storm struck with sudden fury. The waves towered higher than the mast, crashing down with a force that threatened to tear the ships apart. Lightning split the sky, and thunder roared like the hammer of Thor himself. Men clung to the oars and ropes, shouting prayers to Odin and Jord, god of the sea. Eirik's hands bled as he gripped the rail, but he did not falter. Hakon roared encouragement, bellowing like a bear against the storm. 4 hours they battled the waves, until at last the storm passed, leaving the sea calm and silver beneath the moon. Several ships were lost, swallowed by the ocean's fury. Those who survived raised their horns in grim salute to the fallen. Eirik, soaked and exhausted, realized that he had faced death and lived. He was no longer just a farmer's son. He was a Viking, the shores of a new world. Days later, the fleet sighted land. Green hills rose above the mist, dotted with small villages and guarded only by wooden palisades. This was England, a land of wealth and plunder, soft compared to the harsh fjords of the north. The warriors gripped their weapons, eager for battle. Jarl Stenvar raised his hand, and the fleet slowed, drifting silently toward the coast like wolves stalking prey. Eirik's heart thundered in his chest. The sea had carried him to the edge of legend. Now the axe would write his story in blood and fire. Chapter 3. The First Raid. The Silent Landing. The longships glided silently through the fog as dawn began to paint the horizon with streaks of pale gold. The English coast lay before them, rolling green hills, small clusters of wooden houses, and a church tower rising above the mist. To the Vikings, this land seemed soft, fertile, and unguarded, like prey waiting for the wolf. Eirik stood at the prow, his shield slung across his back, his axe ready at his side. His heart pounded so loudly he thought his comrades must hear it. He had dreamed of this moment for years, the first raid, the first clash of steel, the chance to prove himself. Behind him, Hakon the bear grinned with excitement, while the seasoned warriors muttered prayers to Odin and sharpened their blades one last time. Jarl Stenvar gave the signal. Oars dipped silently, guiding the ships into a shallow estuary where reeds hid their approach. The keels scraped against the sand, and the warriors leapt into the cold water, dragging their ships ashore. No horns, no battle cries yet, only silence. The strike would be sudden and merciless. The village of the Cross. Ahead lay a small village clustered around a wooden church. Thin smoke rose from chimneys, roosters crowed. Farmers were already in the fields, bending over their crops, unaware of the storm about to descend upon them. To the Norsemen, these villages seemed defenseless, their people soft and untrained. Where the North demanded strength to survive, here life seemed gentler. But that gentleness would cost them dearly. Jarl Stenvar raised his axe to the sky. "Today, we feed the ravens," he roared. His men echoed the cry, their voices thundering like a storm rolling down from the mountains. Shields locked, weapons raised, they charged. The clash. The first to fall was a shepherd who ran too slowly. Then the Vikings poured into the village like a flood of iron and fire. Women screamed, children scattered, men grabbed pitchforks and rusty swords in desperate defense. But against trained warriors with axes and spears, they stood no chance. Eirik found himself face to face with his first foe, a burly farmer wielding a woodcutter's axe. Fear surged through Eirik's chest, but training and instinct took hold. He raised his shield just as the axe fell, the blow shuddering through his arm. With a roar, he swung his own weapon, biting into the man's shoulder. The farmer crumpled, blood soaking the earth. Eirik froze, staring at the fallen man. For the first time, he had taken a life. The world seemed to spin. But then Hakon's voice bellowed behind him, "Fight, brother! Do not stop now!" And the tide of battle swept him forward. The church doors slammed shut as monks tried to barricade themselves inside. The Vikings hurled their weight against it, smashing it open with axes. Inside, golden chalices gleamed in the candlelight, manuscripts lined the shelves, and terrified monks cowered by the altar. To the Norsemen, this was treasure beyond measure. They stripped the place bare, taking silver, gold, and jeweled crosses. The skalds later sang that the gods themselves must have guided their hands, for never had such riches been seen in one place. The fury of fire. As the sun climbed higher, the village burned. Roofs crackled, smoke rolled skyward, and the cries of the defeated filled the air. The Vikings dragged away livestock, barrels of grain, and captives to be sold as thralls. Eirik watched the flames consume the church. He felt both pride and unease. This was victory, yet also destruction. The monks had not fought, they had begged for mercy. And though he had struck down an armed foe, he could not shake the image of the man's eyes as life left them. Hakon noticed his silence. "You did well, brother," he said, clapping him on the back. "This is the way of the world. The strong take, the weak fall. The gods will remember your courage." The spoils of war. By midday, the ships were heavy with plunder. Chests of silver, sacks of grain, and frightened captives filled the decks. The men feasted on roasted meat taken from the villagers' stores and drank from the very chalices they had stolen from the church. Songs rose over the water as they prepared to sail home. For the warriors, this was only the beginning. Wealth, glory, and renown awaited them across the sea. The tales of their raid would spread like wildfire, striking fear into the hearts of those who had not yet felt the bite of the Norse axe. For Eirik, it was a day of transformation. The farmer's boy who had once dreamed of ships now stood blooded, a warrior among warriors. Yet in the quiet moments, as the ship rocked gently on the tide, he could not silence the questions within him. Was glory worth the blood of the innocent? Did the gods truly bless such deeds? He had no answers. But he knew one truth. His path had begun, and there would be no turning back. The dawn of a legend. As the dragon ships slipped back into the sea, smoke rose from the ruins behind them. Ravens circled above, feasting on the fallen. The Northmen rode with fierce pride, their voices raised in victory chants. The first raid was complete, but it was only a spark. Soon, more fleets would come, more villages would burn, and kings themselves would tremble at the sound of oars on the water. Eirik Stormborn's name was still unknown, but the sagas of the North had begun to write him into their pages. Chapter 4. The Return to the Fjords. The Journey Home. The dragon ships cut across the grey waters of the North Sea, their sails swollen with wind, their hulls heavy with treasure. Behind them, the smoke of the burned village had long faded into memory, yet the echoes of screams and clash of steel lingered in every warrior's mind. Eirik sat near the prow, his hands blistered from the oars, his axe still stained with battle. The salty spray cooled his face, but his heart remained restless. Around him, the men sang victory chants, their voices rough yet triumphant. Some boasted of the gold they had taken, others of the enemies they had slain. Yet in the pauses between songs, there was silence, an unspoken remembrance of those lost to the sea and battle. The sea itself seemed alive, shifting moods from calm to violent without warning. But this time, fortune favored the fleet. The storm stayed distant, the waves gentle, and the gods seemed to bless their return. Soon, the familiar scent of pine forests and the dark silhouettes of the Norwegian fjords appeared on the horizon. Home was near. The arrival. The first horns sounded from the shore before the ships were even docked. Word had spread of their return. Families gathered at the water's edge, their cries carrying across the water. Children splashed into the shallows to greet fathers and brothers, while women raised their arms in welcome. The warriors leapt into the surf, dragging the longships ashore. Heavy chests of silver and sacks of grain were carried up the beach, and prisoners, destined for a life of servitude, were bound in ropes. The village erupted in cheers, for the raid had brought wealth enough to feed and clothe the people through another harsh winter. Eirik's mother pressed through the crowd, her eyes shining with tears. She clasped her son tightly, whispering a prayer of thanks to the gods. He had left a boy, uncertain and untested, but now he stood taller, scarred by battle, a man in the eyes of his people. The division of spoils. Once the treasures were gathered, Jarl Stenvar called his warriors to the great hall. Torches burned bright, casting shadows across the carved wooden beams. The air smelled of smoke, mead, and anticipation. Tradition demanded that the loot be divided according to rank and contribution. First, the gods were honored. A golden chalice was placed upon the altar of Thor, along with a share of silver for the temple. Next, the Jarl claimed his portion, larger than all others. Then came the captains, the seasoned warriors, and finally the young fighters like Eirik. The hall fell silent as Stenvar tossed Eirik a pouch of silver coins. "You fought with courage, though your hand was untested," the Jarl declared. "This is your share, and with it, your place among us as a warrior." The men cheered, and Eirik felt pride burn within him. He was no longer a farmer's boy, he was part of the Brotherhood of the Sea. The Feast of Victory. That night, the hall thundered with celebration. Long tables were piled high with roasted meats, fish, and bread. Horns of mead and ale passed from hand to hand, spilling golden foam onto the wooden benches. The skald, draped in furs, rose to sing. He told of the raid in a booming voice, describing the flames that devoured the English village, the treasures seized, and the fearless charge of the warriors. Each name called out was met with cheers and pounding fists on the tables. When the skald spoke of Eirik's first kill, the young warrior's face flushed. His name, once unknown, now echoed in the hall. Hakon the Bear rose and lifted his horn. "To Eirik Stormborn," he bellowed. "May his axe never fail and his courage never falter." The hall roared with approval, and mead spilled in Eirik's honor. For the first time, he felt the intoxicating taste of fame. The quiet of the morning. When dawn broke, The hall lay silent, the fire reduced to embers. Warriors snored among the benches, empty horns and bones scattered around them. Eirik slipped outside into the crisp morning air. The fjord lay still, its surface like a mirror reflecting the snow-capped mountains. The longships rested on the shore, their carved prows pointing proudly toward the horizon. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing across the cliffs. Eirik walked alone, the silver pouch heavy at his belt. Pride warmed him, but doubt crept back into his mind. He remembered the faces of the villagers, the fear, the desperation. Were they truly enemies? Or had fate simply placed them in the path of Viking hunger? Yet when he looked at the hall behind him, where his people feasted, safe and well-fed, he understood. The raid was not only for glory but for survival. Without such journeys, his village might wither in hunger. The gods demanded strength, and he had answered their call. The seeds of destiny. In the weeks that followed, life returned to rhythm. Farmers tended their fields, women wove cloth and brewed mead, children played in the grass. But everything was changed. The raid had filled the village with wealth and pride. The people spoke eagerly of new voyages, of greater treasures waiting beyond the sea. Eirik trained each day with his axe and shield, his muscles hardening, his spirit sharpening. He no longer dreamed of adventure. It was now his path, carved as surely as runes on stone. He began to feel the weight of destiny pressing upon him. And in the shadows, whispers spread of greater plans. Jarl Stenvar, emboldened by victory, was gathering allies. Larger raids were to come, not just against small villages but against kings and fortresses. The age of small strikes was ending. The age of Viking conquest was dawning. Eirik Stormborn, though still young, sensed that his saga was only beginning. Chapter 5. The Gathering Storm. Whispers in the hall. Winter had passed, and with the thaw came restless hearts. The victory of the raid echoed through every fjord, and other jarls whispered of Stenvar's growing strength. His hall, once a modest seat of power, now overflowed with treasure. Silver spilled from chests, goblets of gold gleamed in the torchlight, and thralls toiled in the kitchens and stables. Yet wealth alone did not satisfy him. Stenvar's eyes gleamed with ambition. No longer did he speak of raiding mere villages. He spoke of kingdoms, of monasteries fat with gold, of kings trembling before Viking might. Around the fire he gathered his captains, plotting not one raid but a campaign, a season of conquest. Eirik sat among them, still new to this circle, listening as men argued over routes and risks. Some called for the rich coasts of Francia, where monasteries lay like lambs before wolves. Others urged to return to England, where rivers ran deep inland, leading to towns ripe for plunder. A few, drunk on glory, even spoke of sailing south, past strange lands, to where the sun burned hotter and the riches grew unimaginable. But beneath the excitement lurked something darker. Eirik noticed the sidelong glances, the murmurs when Stenvar left the room. Power drew envy as surely as blood drew wolves. The shadow of Sigurd. Among those present was Sigurd the Fox, a cunning jarl from a neighboring fjord. His hair was streaked with gray, his smile sharp as a blade. He praised Stenvar openly, raising his horn in toasts, yet his eyes lingered too long on the treasure, and his words carried hidden barbs. "Your raid was bold, Stenvar," Sigurd said one night, his voice smooth as oil. "But boldness can drown a man as easily as it can raise him. Too many ships, too many mouths to feed. Such ambition requires care." Stenvar bristled but laughed it off. "Do you fear the sea, old fox? My men are hungry for more, and the gods favor those who dare." The hall roared with approval, yet Eirik felt unease twist in his gut. Hakon muttered under his breath, "That fox has sharp teeth. Watch him, brother. He smiles too wide. Training for war." As plans grew, so did preparations. The shipwrights worked day and night, shaping new longships from oak trees felled in the forest. Their axes rang like music, their sawdust filled the air. Women spun wool for sails dyed crimson, while smiths hammered iron into fresh blades. The village became a forge of war. Eirik trained daily with Hakon and the other warriors. They drilled with shields in tight formations, learning to lock together as a wall of wood and iron. They practiced boarding maneuvers, leaping from ship to ship as if the decks were bridges of fire. They sharpened their axes until they could shave hair from their arms, and they threw spears until their shoulders ached. At night, the younger warriors gathered around the skald, who recited tales of Ragnar Lodbrok and other heroes of old. Eirik listened with burning pride, imagining his own name woven into such songs. Yet when sleep came, his dreams were troubled. He saw fire on the water, men turning their blades not against enemies but against each other. The oath by the fjord. Before spring's end, Stenvar called a great assembly. Warriors from many villages arrived, their ships filling the fjord like a forest of dragon prows. Fires blazed on the shore, drums beat, and horns called the men to gather. There, beneath the cold stars, Stenvar stood upon a rock and raised his axe high. "Brothers," he roared, "the sea is wide, and its riches endless. This year we do not strike once and return. This year we sail as a storm. 50 ships, 100 more. We will take not just silver, but kingdoms. Who will join me?" The roar that followed shook the cliffs. Men raised their swords, their shields, their voices. They swore oaths of loyalty, vowing to follow Stenvar wherever the sea carried him. Eirik, swept up in the tide of voices, lifted his axe and cried out his oath. In that moment, he felt part of something greater than himself, a storm that would change the world. Yet even as the men cheered, Eirik's eyes caught Sigurd's. The fox's smile was thin, and his gaze cold. Eirik shivered, though the fires burned hot. The Feast of Alliances. The following days were filled with feasting. Jarl Stenvar hosted Sigurd and other allies, seating them at his side, pouring them mead from golden horns. Songs filled the hall, boasting of past victories and dreaming of future ones. But in the corners of the hall, Eirik heard whispers, of promises made, of rivalries rekindled, of old debts unsettled. A drunken warrior spoke too freely. Sigurd would see himself king of these fjords, not Stenvar. Another muttered that too much gold had gone to the Jarl, and too little to the men. Hakon warned Eirik to hold his tongue. These halls are filled with ears sharper than knives. Speak only when asked, and watch carefully. Not every enemy wears the face of a Saxon monk. Eirik nodded, but his heart was heavy. He had dreamed of glory, of clear battles and songs of victory. Yet already he saw that the greater danger might not come from across the sea, but from within their own halls. Storm on the horizon. When the last feast ended, the warriors returned to their villages to prepare. The fjords rang with the sound of axes in the woods, of forges pounding iron, of sails flapping in the wind. The storm was gathering, not in the sky, but in the hearts of men. Eirik stood on the cliff above the fjord, watching the fleet below. Never before had so many ships assembled in one place. Their carved prows glared out at the horizon like a line of waiting beasts, hungry for war. The wind tugged at his cloak, carrying with it the cries of gulls and the smell of salt. He closed his eyes and felt the weight of the future pressing down on him. He was part of something vast, something that would shake kingdoms. But he also felt the shadow of treachery curling at the edges of this great venture, like storm clouds before the lightning strike. The gathering storm was not only of sails and oars, but of men's hearts, and Eirik knew it would break sooner or later. Chapter 6: Blood on the River. The First Strike. Dawn broke over the misty river, casting a silver glow on the wooden longships that lined the shore. Stenvar's fleet had grown even larger since the fjord assembly. 60 ships in all, each carrying warriors eager for their first taste of conquest in foreign lands. The river, winding like a serpent through the green English countryside, promised both opportunity and danger. Stenvar stood at the prow of his flagship, axe in hand, surveying the misty banks. Beside him, Hakon adjusted his helmet and checked the warriors under his command. Eirik's heart pounded. This was no longer training, no longer tales around the fire. The moment for real blood had come. "Remember," Stenvar said, his voice echoing across the water, "we strike hard, we strike fast. Take what is ours, and return to your ships before they can organize. Kill only when necessary, but leave no doubt of our power." The fleet moved silently, paddles slicing the water with rhythmic precision. In the mist, the towers of a monastery appeared, stone walls rising above the trees, the bells still silent with dawn. Landing on foreign soil. The longships touched the muddy bank. Warriors leapt onto the shore, axes and shields ready. Eirik felt the earth under his boots, foreign and soft, scented with dew and grass. The monastery's gates were wooden, strong, but the Vikings had tools for such defenses. A horn sounded. Stenvar raised his axe and roared, "For glory! For Odin!" Axes struck wood. Shields smashed doors. The monks inside barely had time to react. Some fled into hidden chambers, others tried to defend with staffs and prayer, but they were no match for the hardened warriors. Eirik moved with Hakon, clearing a side courtyard. Men fell around him, some from defensive attacks, others from accidents in the chaos. Smoke rose from torches set to ignite storehouses. The monastery's treasures, gold chalices, silver crosses, and jars of precious oils, were loaded onto wagons dragged to the ships. Amid the carnage, Eirik saw a young monk hiding behind a wall. Something stirred in him, a fleeting hesitation. But Stenvar's roar reminded him, hesitation could mean death. He raised his axe, the sun glinting off the blade, and pushed forward. Chaos on the river. By midday, the monks had sent word to nearby towns. Riders galloped along muddy roads, ringing bells to call the local levies. Smoke rose into the sky like a signal, a warning of the Viking onslaught. Stenvar knew they had limited time. "Back to the ships. Load the treasures," he commanded. The Vikings fought a desperate rearguard action, fending off farmers and hastily armed men while carrying stolen gold to the riverbank. Eirik threw himself into the fray, striking enemies with precision, ducking under swinging axes, and leaping over fallen bodies. The river reflected the chaos, shields floating in the current, swords glinting in the sun, warriors shouting victory or pain. A sudden threat. As the last of the treasures were loaded, a horn sounded from the far bank. Cavalry had arrived, heavily armored men riding down the slopes toward the longships. Panic stirred among the younger warriors. "Form ranks. Shields first," Stenvar bellowed. The Vikings formed a line, a wall of wood and iron. Spears braced, axes at the ready. Hakon roared commands, rallying the men. Eirik's arms ached, but he stood firm, shoulder to shoulder with his brothers in arms. The cavalry charged. Horses struck the river's edge, mud flying, hooves pounding. The Vikings braced, thrusting spears into the horses, hacking at riders who fell to the ground. Chaos erupted as man and beast collided. Eirik ducked under a sword, drove his axe into a shield, and rolled away as Hakon struck down a rider beside him. Victory and loss. When the dust and smoke cleared, the cavalry had been repelled, and the Vikings boarded their ships with the spoils. Yet the victory came at a cost. 20 warriors lay dead, many more wounded. Eirik's friend, Bjorn, had taken a spear to the leg and would not fight again this season. Stenvar looked over his men, pride mingled with grim calculation. "This is but the beginning," he said. "Let the kingdoms tremble. Let them know the storm approaches." Eirik sat on the deck, cleaning his axe and staring at the river that had been a battlefield. Blood mixed with mud, reflecting the morning sun. He thought of the monks, the families who lived peacefully here, and yet he felt no regret, only a growing understanding that war changed everything. Return to the fjord. The fleet sailed home with the tide, treasures secured, men singing songs of victory. Stenvar plotted their next strike, already envisioning towns, castles, and monasteries to conquer. Eirik leaned against the railing, exhausted, bruised, and exhilarated. He had seen death, wielded power, and survived. He was part of a story larger than himself, written in blood and fire along the rivers of England. But beneath the triumph, he remembered the look in Sigurd's eyes from the fjord assembly. Ambition was a double-edged axe, and not all threats came from distant lands. Some waited closer, in the hearts of men he trusted. The storm was no longer just on the horizon. It had begun. Chapter 7: Treachery in the Shadows. The calm before the storm. After their successful raid on the river monastery, Stenvar's fleet returned to the fjord laden with treasure. The men celebrated, drinking mead and singing songs of glory. The fjord echoed with laughter, horns, and the ringing of axes on shields as new warriors tested their strength. Yet in the shadows of the hall, whispers stirred. Sigurd the fox had not forgotten the treasures of the monastery, nor the rise of Stenvar's power. He met secretly with a few ambitious warriors, men dissatisfied with their share or resentful of Stenvar's growing authority. "Power must be taken, not given," Sigurd murmured, his smile thin as a knife's edge. "Stenvar grows fat with gold while others toil. We can change that." The men nodded, eyes gleaming with greed and fear. Plans were made quietly, messages sent under the cover of night. Trust, it seemed, was a currency in short supply among men whose hearts hungered for wealth and glory. Suspicion in the ranks. Eirik noticed changes among his comrades. A few men avoided him, whispering behind their hands. Weapons were polished more carefully, glances lingered longer, and subtle questions arose about who would lead the next raid. Hakon observed the same signs. One evening, he pulled Eirik aside in the armory. "Watch Sigurd," he said, voice low. "He smiles, but his eyes plot. A man like that will strike when we least expect it. Keep your axe close and your mind sharper." Eirik nodded, unease settling like a stone in his stomach. The fjord, calm and silver in the moonlight, no longer felt like home. Danger was no longer across the sea. It hid in plain sight, in the men sworn to fight beside them. The gathering of allies. Sigurd's circle grew. Dissatisfied warriors, minor jarls, and even some merchants dissatisfied with Stenvar's taxes and levies joined in secret. They plotted to ambush the fleet on its next raid, to seize the spoils and declare Sigurd as the new leader. "Strike when the fleet is divided," Sigurd instructed, "when Stenvar believes all is well. Cut off his strongest men, take the treasure, and no one will stop us. The gods favor those bold enough to seize destiny." Every word was calculated, every plan a trap waiting to be sprung. The next expedition. Spring returned, and with it, a new raid. Stenvar led 50 ships down the coast to a rich trading town, unaware of the seeds of betrayal growing within his own ranks. Warriors prepared, sails were unfurled, and the longships moved like silver arrows across the waves. Eirik kept a close eye on Sigurd, noting how he lingered near key positions, whispering to allies and scanning for weaknesses. The tension was almost tangible, a storm of suspicion beneath the surface of camaraderie. The ambush. As the fleet approached the town, Sigurd struck. He signaled a small contingent of warriors to break off from the main group, creating confusion. Some ships turned unexpectedly, attacking Stenvar's strongest warriors. The fleet erupted into chaos. Eirik fought fiercely, defending the rear as Sigurd's men tried to seize the gold and carve a path to power. Blades clashed, shields splintered, and screams echoed across the water. Stenvar roared orders, rallying his loyalists, but the betrayal cut deep. Trusted men turned against them, allies became enemies, and the once pristine fleet became a battlefield of blood and fire. Confrontation with Sigurd. Eirik found himself face to face with Sigurd in the heart of the chaos. The fox smiled, axe raised. "You should have joined me, boy," he hissed. "The strong take what they deserve." Eirik's grip tightened on his weapon. "I fight for Stenvar. Always." The two clashed, steel ringing against steel, sparks flying with every strike. Around them, men fell, ships rocked, and the tide of battle threatened to sweep them all away. Eirik ducked a brutal swing, countering with a strike that forced Sigurd back. The fight was long, exhausting, and brutal. Each knew the stakes were more than life or death. It was the future of the fleet itself. Victory and loss. In the end, Stenvar's loyalists gained the upper hand. Sigurd's plot was foiled, his men either captured or slain, and the fleet rallied. The town was sacked, treasure seized, but the cost was heavy. Many warriors had fallen, and the sense of trust was shattered. Eirik, bruised and bleeding, sat among the wounded and the victorious. The fjord that welcomed them home now seemed colder, harsher, a reminder that even among brothers in arms, danger could lurk in the shadows. Aftermath and reflection. Stenvar addressed his men in the great hall, eyes like fire. "We are stronger for surviving this treachery. But let it be a warning. Ambition, unchecked, can destroy even the mightiest fleet. Loyalty is everything. Remember this." Eirik listened, feeling the weight of the lesson. He had seen firsthand how easily power could corrupt, how ambition could twist men into monsters. He vowed to stay vigilant, to fight not just with strength, but with wisdom and watchfulness. The storm of betrayal had passed, but the winds of ambition and conquest would never cease. The fjord, once a place of home, was now a crucible, testing every heart, every blade, and every oath. Chapter 9: Winter at the Fjord. The first frost. The fjord lay in silence, blanketed in white. Snow fell thick and unrelenting, coating the ships, the wooden hulls, and the surrounding cliffs. The once bustling village now looked ghostly, with only the sound of wind whistling through the pines and the occasional crack of ice breaking the surface of the frozen water. Stenvar stood at the prow of his flagship, watching the frozen fjord reflect the dim winter sun. "The seas sleep," he muttered, "but the world does not. Winter tests us in ways battle never could." Eirik shivered, drawing his cloak tighter. The warmth of spring raids and summer conquests felt like another life. Now, survival was the foremost challenge. Food, firewood, and shelter were as vital as swords or shields. Hunger and scarcity. The stores of preserved meat and grains were low. Hunting had become difficult, as snow-covered tracks and frozen rivers made fishing nearly impossible. Warriors grew restless and hungry, tempers fraying with each passing day. Hakon walked among the men, distributing rations. "We survive together," he reminded them. "Share what little we have. Starvation can turn even brothers in arms into enemies." Despite his words, small quarrels broke out. Some men accused others of hoarding supplies. Arguments over warmth near the fire turned into minor brawls. The unity forged in battle was now under siege by nature itself. The long nights. The nights were endless, dark, and bitter. Snowstorms trapped the fleet and the village in isolation, forcing warriors to remain indoors. Fires crackled, but the smoke stung eyes and filled the air with a heavy, choking scent. Eirik spent long hours at the forge, repairing weapons and sharpening axes. He worked alongside blacksmiths and carpenters, understanding that survival required more than bravery. It required skill, patience, and preparation. Meanwhile, rumors of mutiny began to surface. Some younger warriors, emboldened by hunger and boredom, whispered about challenging Stenvar's leadership, questioning why they had risked life and limb only to freeze by the fjord. A lesson in leadership. Stenvar recognized the brewing tension. One evening, he called all men to the great hall, where the fire blazed high. "Winter is harsh, but it is a test," he proclaimed. "Not all battles are fought with swords. Some are fought with patience, endurance, and wisdom. A leader is not the one who commands in spring. It is the one who stands when the frost bites." Eirik watched the men listen, many nodding reluctantly. Some hearts softened, some hardened further, reminded that the Viking life demanded loyalty and discipline even in hardship. Preparation for the next raid. Even as snow fell, Stenvar's mind remained on conquest. The raids would continue, and the men would need to be ready. He organized training exercises indoors, practicing shield formations and hand-to-hand combat by the fire. He sent scouts to the coasts, breaking through snowdrifts to ensure the fleet's routes remained clear when the thaw came. Eirik worked tirelessly alongside Hakon, reinforcing ships, checking hulls for cracks, and repairing sails. The fjord, once a highway of freedom, now felt like a trap that demanded ingenuity and resilience. Internal conflicts. Winter also brought personal struggles. Eirik found himself at odds with a fellow warrior, Bjorn, over leadership of a patrol. Words escalated, nearly drawing steel, until Hakon intervened. "Your anger will kill more than the ice ever could," he warned. Men were forced to reconcile grievances or risk weakening the entire community. Trust, already fragile after Sigurd's betrayal and the siege of Eldom, needed constant nurturing. The harsh winter reminded every Viking that survival required both strength of body and strength of spirit. Moments of reflection. In the quiet of the long nights, Eirik often climbed the cliffs overlooking the fjord, gazing at the frozen waters. He thought of the battles fought, the friends lost, the victories won, and the long road ahead. He realized that every raid, every conquest, was a fleeting glory compared to the endurance required to survive the mundane cruelty of winter. The fjord, though beautiful, was unforgiving. And yet, it shaped them. tested their courage, loyalty, and resolve in ways the battlefield could not. The promise of spring. Though the snow was deep and the nights unending, a faint warmth hinted at the approaching spring. Stenvar spoke to Eirik one morning while inspecting the fleet. Winter breaks the weak, tempers the strong, and teaches patience. When the seas awaken again, we will be ready, not just to fight, but to endure. Eirik nodded, understanding that survival was as important as conquest. The fjord had taught him humility and vigilance, lessons he would carry into every raid, every battle, and every storm yet to come. The Vikings, hardened by frost, hunger, and isolation, awaited the thaw, ready to sail once more, their spirits tempered like steel against the cold. Chapter 10. The Voyage to the Eastern Isles. Setting sail. Spring arrived slowly, melting the last of the fjord's ice. Stenvar's fleet, now fully repaired and reinforced, was ready. Sails snapped in the wind, the smell of salt and seaweed filled the air, and the men felt the familiar thrill of open water. "Today we sail for the Eastern Isles," Stenvar announced, his voice booming across the assembled warriors. "New lands, new riches, new glory. Let no man falter." Eirik tightened his grip on his axe. The memory of winter's hardships still lingered, but the call of the sea was irresistible. Every man on the fleet felt it, the promise of adventure and the danger that came with it. Journey across the sea. The voyage was long and arduous. Storms whipped the sails, waves battered the ships, and gusts threatened to capsize the smaller vessels. Eirik and his comrades worked tirelessly, adjusting rigging, bailing water, and keeping morale high. During the nights, the men gathered around fires on deck, sharing stories of past raids. Some spoke of eldom, of narrow escapes and heroic deeds, others of lands unknown, brimming with treasure. The stories strengthened bonds, forging loyalty even after months of isolation. First encounter. After weeks at sea, a cluster of islands appeared on the horizon. Mist shrouded their shores, hiding dense forests and rocky cliffs. Scouts reported small villages along the coast, suggesting both opportunity and danger. Stenvar divided the fleet. Some ships would approach the main island for trade and reconnaissance, while others, including Eirik's vessel, circled smaller islands to scout hidden inlets and potential ambush points. The first encounter was sudden. Raiders from a coastal village spotted the Vikings and launched a surprise attack with spears and flaming arrows. The clash was fierce and chaotic. Eirik led the flankers, striking swiftly to protect the fleet while minimizing losses. Within hours, the village was subdued, and prisoners were taken for intelligence. Exploration and discovery. The Eastern Isles were unlike any land the Vikings had seen. Dense jungles replaced the familiar pine forests, exotic birds called from the canopy, and rivers flowed with startling clarity. Strange fruits and unfamiliar wildlife challenged their survival skills, but also promised new resources. Eirik explored inland with a small party, mapping rivers and scouting settlements. They discovered fortified villages, terraces for crops, and evidence of complex societies. The Vikings realized that these islands were not simple targets. They were inhabited by people with their own strategies, warriors, and customs. Battle for the main island. Word reached Stenvar that a powerful tribe controlled the largest settlement. The chief, a tall warrior named Kale, refused to negotiate. Stenvar knew that to claim the main island, a decisive strike was needed. The attack was meticulously planned. The flankers infiltrated under cover of darkness, disabling defenses and opening gates. Meanwhile, Stenvar's main force attacked from the beach, creating chaos and dividing the enemy. Eirik fought through narrow streets, cutting down defenders while protecting his comrades. The battle was brutal. Kale himself challenged Stenvar to single combat. Axes clashed, sparks flew, and the clash of titans echoed across the village. Stenvar finally overpowered Kale, forcing him to surrender. With their leader captured, the villagers yielded. The cost of victory. Though the island was conquered, The cost was high. Many warriors were wounded or dead, and the harsh terrain took a toll on supplies. Yet the victory brought not only land, but alliances. Some tribes chose to cooperate rather than resist, recognizing Stenvar's strength and wisdom. Eirik reflected on the long journey, from Eldom, through winter at the fjord, to the Eastern Isles. Each step had tested him, teaching the value of endurance, strategy, and loyalty. He had fought bravely, led comrades, and survived storms both natural and human. A new era. Stenvar stood on the cliffs overlooking the Eastern Isles. The wind carried the scent of the sea and the promise of more adventures. We have conquered lands, survived winter, and proven ourselves at sea. But this is only the beginning. The world is vast, and our saga is far from over. Eirik watched the horizon, feeling a mixture of pride, exhaustion, and anticipation. The Vikings had grown stronger, wiser, and more united. The Eastern Isles were a testament to their courage, and a reminder that every victory was hard-earned. As the sun set, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson, the fleet prepared to explore further islands, trade, raid, and carve their legacy across unknown seas. The saga of Stenvar and his warriors was only just beginning, their names destined to echo through generations as fearless explorers and conquerors.